You've had a spiritual awakening experience, and now life feels dull, bland, lonely, and confusing. I feel you, but you're not alone. This is something that all spiritual seekers go through, and it's called the dark night of the soul. I myself had a dark night that lasted 8 long months. This is a crucial transition phase, which on the one hand is a real opportunity for lasting spiritual growth, but on the other hand, it's super challenging. If you don't navigate this period carefully, you may find yourself back in old ego patterns and lose this golden opportunity. So in this episode, we dive deep into the dark night of the soul, offering strategies and insights of how to make it through to the other side, to the beautiful new dawn that is awaiting you. My name is Abhinava, and this is Spirit Matters, a podcast helping modern seekers integrate their spiritual awakening experience into their daily life. My co-host Vajan and myself are meditation teachers with over 25 years of experience. Every week we offer insights, strategies, and grounded practices to deal with the modern spirituality challenge. And if you like our content, we'd really appreciate it if you rate us in your favorite podcast app or leave a comment if you're watching this on YouTube. We really appreciate it, and it helps us with the algorithms. Okay, now let's dive in. Today we are going to dive into the dark night of the soul. And there's a lot of different ideas about this concept and different definitions. So let me just explain how we see the dark night of the soul. And then we can dive deep into what it is and actually how you navigate your way through it, because it is a difficult period. And in ordinary language, the dark night of the soul can be a crisis of faith or just any difficult period in your life. But from a spiritual perspective, there's a really special period, which we can call the dark night of the soul. And this happens usually right after a spiritual awakening experience. So when you have your first spiritual awakening experience, it can be a very transformative experience in your life that totally changes your worldview. And so this clashes with, your earlier worldview. So many people, especially here in the West, we're brought up in this materialist paradigm. So our worldview is usually that of, we live in a three-dimensional world, which is run by physical forces. And this is also our, just physical experience of having a body and five senses, through which we perceive the world. And then when we have a spiritual awakening experience, we suddenly realize that there's more. There's more between heaven and earth, as Shakespeare said. And that can be a very jarring experience in one sense, because our old worldview no longer holds true. And it's this transition from the old, where our old worldview kind of crumbles and our new worldview has not yet taken birth, which we can call the dark night of the soul. You can compare it to a caterpillar who is transforming into a butterfly. There's this period where he builds the cocoon phase. And he withdraws into this dark, lonely spot where he has to grow his wings. And this is the phase where we find ourselves when we are in the dark night of the soul. Our old identity no longer feels true. The way we've identified ourselves with, just a physical part of our nature. We think we're this character or this person. And suddenly we have a glimpse behind the curtain. We see that there's much more to us, that we feel a glimpse of our divinity, our higher self. But, our new identity has not been fully formed yet. And it is this that causes this sense of confusion, the sense of loneliness, the sense of being unmoored from our normal day-to-day life. We can also feel estranged from our friends, from our family, from our colleagues. Everything feels strange and somehow distant. And so, some of the symptoms are that you feel life is very bland. There's a kind of a pall, kind of a grayish feeling to the days, because, the spiritual experience itself can be a wondrous experience full of beauty, color, feeling, deep love. Whatever way it manifests itself to you, this is a wonderful experience. But then right after that, when you are in this transition period, that can feel very bland. And, there's sometimes a depression that is there. It's not a very deep depression, but it's kind of nothing makes sense anymore. You feel a loss of purpose, loss of meaning. You're not attracted to the same things anymore. Your desires fall away. And there's a saying by Sri Aurobindo that none can reach heaven who have not passed through hell. And it's kind of this idea that I want to talk about more deeply today. That it seems, you can describe the spirit as hell. It's not a hell in the sense of fire and brimstone and deep pain and pangs, but it's it's a hell where there is no meaning. You can also describe hell as loss of meaning, as being lonely and feeling unmoored. And why is it, Vajan, if I ask you, why do we have to pass through hell to reach heaven?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really great synopsis of the idea that we're going to be talking about. So wonderful introduction. Thank you, Abhinava. Um, so how I see it, and from my perspective, is that it is hell for the ego, because it's the period of time where the ego is fighting for its survival. It's the period of time where you have seen through the game, or the illusion, of Maya in some way, and you've seen that so much of what you base your reality on is not the truest or deepest reality. And so then for the ego, it is an existential crisis, because the ego sees and feels that it is going to lose control. It is going to be left behind. It is going to be in some way annihilated if you continue on in this way. So it tries every trick in the book to convince you that it's not worth trying, that you should give up now, that it's much safer to stay with the ego. It's much safer to stay with the character that you knew, and to play that small role and that small game. That's the wise, the smart person would do those things. And so there's this tremendous sense of friction, where this one part of you is trying to hold you back and pull you back into the reality you were living in, whereas the other part is trying to pull you forward into a new reality and trying to birth or blossom into a higher or deeper reality.
And that's why I think it's so important to keep going, keep pushing through, and keep believing in this spiritual reality that you've seen. Because if you don't do anything with it, yeah, the pull back to the old life is going to be so strong that at some point doubt will come. You'll start doubting your spiritual awakening experience, and before you know it, you're back where you started from. And that would be a shame, because really a spiritual awakening is literally that. It's a wake up call. It's basically God coming down and saying, hey, wake up, we're going to play a different game now. And
Mm.
our teacher, Sri Chinmoy, made a clear distinction between these two forces in the universe, the force of desire and the force of aspiration. The force of desire, the desire for things outside of ourselves, can be wealth, career, status, experiences, a partner, whatever form that desire takes. And then aspiration being the inner longing for truth, like the inflowing. It's also a desire, but it's a very deep longing and striving to reach that higher self. And the spiritual awakening experience is right on the cusp between our old desire life and our new aspiration life. So it's basically you're being called to transition from your old ordinary desire life, where we can call it the ordinary life because most people are living that life right now in the world. I would say it's the majority that is living the desire life. But then more and more people nowadays also are waking up, and they're feeling, no, there's more to life than just fulfilling my desires. And then that is the wake up call that gets you ready for aspiration life. But aspiration life has its own, let's say, its own demands, its own challenges. And you actually have to start a spiritual practice. If you want to get anywhere in the aspiration life, you need to aspire, which means you need to meditate, you need to go within on a regular basis. You need to feed that aspiration. It's like a little flame. And if you don't, feed the flame, it may flicker, sputter, and die out. And so, yeah, that's the challenge is here to really make that transition, to go through the cocoon phase. And when you're in the cocoon phase, don't feel that nothing is happening, because you are growing your wings, until that beautiful day dawns when the cocoon breaks open and you're a butterfly. You're ready to fly away, and your new spiritual identity is fully formed. You have a grounded practice. You know who you are. You have a better sense of who you are from a spiritual perspective, and then life takes on a fully new meaning. But there's infinitely more meaning, purpose, happiness, fulfillment in that life. And especially when you reach there, you can and you look back on your old, let's say, your old desire life, you feel so grateful because you've made it through. You've made it through the dark night, and you're now in the dawn of the new aspiration life.
And the spiritual masters have warned as well that this is a really key and almost dangerous point in your spiritual life, because if you've had this awakening experience and you've seen this beautiful, bright future. But then you become discouraged, you become afraid, you become fearful and doubtful, and you decide to try and go back and just stay living in the life of the desire life. You'll find no satisfaction there. And I think that's one of the great tragedies, when someone does have that calling to step forward into something more beautiful and more fulfilling, but fear conquers them, because they get stuck almost like in no man's land, because they can never fully enjoy the pleasures of the world anymore, because they know that it's an unreality, that it's not the highest reality, and they'll forever be somewhat regretful of their decision not to try and step forward into this new game and this new reality. So I think for anyone who is going through the experience, it's like the great analogy that people often use from modern popular culture is the experience that Neo has in the Matrix of being offered, the red pill to wake up and to see reality as it truly is, or to take the blue pill and go back to sleep. And the problem is, if you do choose to take the blue pill and to go back to sleep, you'll forever be haunted by the knowledge that everything you're experiencing, there's a sense of unreality to it. Like before you had the awakening experience, you just thought, eating a steak was eating a steak, and, going to, a beautiful vacation was going to a beautiful vacation. You could enjoy things for what they were. But when you know that there's some deeper and more fulfilling and more profound reality that is calling to you, but you're choosing to try and ignore it and to remain with those small pleasures, there's something about that causes there's a tremendous almost sadness, and
Yeah.
there's a particular type of suffering that caused by that.
That's why they say ignorance is bliss, right? Because when you're in ignorance, you don't know that this is perhaps not the real reality. But of course, it's not true that ignorance is bliss. Ignorance can never be bliss. But I guess for the soul who chooses the blue pill, they wish, oh, I wish I'd never took any pills, and I wish I never had to choose and could just live my life. But now
Yeah.
everything is exactly like it's colored by this feeling of loss, that you haven't chosen that step. You feel that perhaps you're not really seeing the real reality there. And perhaps it's interesting to see where this term dark night of the soul actually comes from. I did a
Mm.
little research, and I saw that there was a Spanish mystic in the 16th century, Spanish mystic, Saint John of the Cross was his English name. And he wrote a poem and then a commentary on that poem, which came out as The Dark Night of the Soul. And he differentiated two dark nights. He differentiated the night of the senses and the night of the spirit. And
Mm.
interestingly, the first one is basically a little bit more superficial part, where you feel, what a little bit what we just talked about, your old desires, your worldly attachments, your ambitions, they no longer give you any joy. So you have glimpsed a higher reality, and you feel that your old life is not giving you joy and purpose. So the senses, the game of the senses kind of dies for you. You feel that there's no gratification or satisfaction to be had from just the senses. But then there's a deeper night. He calls it the night of the spirit. And this is kind of where the mind and the identity go through purification process. So here you have things like doubt, loneliness. You really question who you really are. You don't know who you are. You feel lost. You feel lonely. You feel confused. And this is the more intense night of the soul, and it can last a long time. I sent you an article about Mother Teresa, and unbelievably, she went through a dark night of the soul that lasted 49 years. From the moment she started her work helping the poor in Calcutta, I think that was in 1948, all the way to her death in 1997. And so she wrote letters about her. I mean, nobody knew about this in public. She kept this really hidden or secret, and she didn't want to talk about it in public. But she wrote to her spiritual advisors, counselors in the church. She had these people she wrote to, and the letters have actually been published. I think in 2013, there's a book came out with those letters, and it is unbelievably, well, it's, you could say, shocking, but it's also, amazing that she didn't feel any spiritual fulfillment during this entire time. So she wrote about a great darkness that she felt, and I actually have some quotes from that letter just to read out. So she wrote, She wrote to this spiritual advisor, please pray specially for me that I may not spoil his work and that our Lord may show himself. For there is such terrible darkness within me, as if everything was dead. It has been like this more or less from the time I started the work. She calls her mission the work, the missions of charity that she's founded in India. And then she also wrote, Jesus has a very special love for you, but as for me, the silence and the emptiness is so great that I look and do not see, listen and do not hear. She had one brief interlude in her dark night, where she actually, when the Pope died, I think it was a Pope who died somewhere in the 50s or 60s, and she's
1959.
good, yeah, you remembered it. And she
Yeah.
started praying to him, to his soul, and she had a 5-week kind of break from her dark night when she felt spiritual fulfillment, she felt joy, and unfortunately for her, it only lasted 5 weeks. And so, of course, the atheists are going to have a field day with this, because I already read that, Christopher Hitchens, the well-known atheist, he started writing, oh, you see, she was just fooling herself. There was no God, and, she just felt this emptiness. But they very conveniently ignore the fact that Mother Teresa had very deep spiritual experiences and visions before she started the work. So she was a nun, and she was in India already doing missionary work. And she had this vision of Christ coming to her and really asking her to serve the poor and the downtrodden in Calcutta. And she wrote about this, and she did have spiritual experiences, but also she had a special prayer that she prayed to Christ, let me suffer like you did on the cross. That was actually one of her prayers. She really wanted to experience the suffering and the loneliness of Christ. And so you could say from a spiritual point of view that her prayer was answered. She did get that experience of complete spiritual emptiness. And for me, it's just an unbelievable testament to her, her faith, really. I mean, she never lost faith in Jesus and God, in her work. And I came across a poem of Sri Chinmoy, which I think really speaks to her amazing achievement, because Sri Chinmoy wrote in one of his aphorisms, you have no idea how much you do for mankind when you love God unconditionally, even for a fleeting moment. So she really loved God unconditionally. There was nothing coming back in terms of spiritual fulfillment. And so, she really, I guess, did a lot for mankind, not only through her service, but also through her unconditional love.
Yeah, so I think one of the morals of this is be careful what you pray for, because you
Yes,
may just receive it. And
exactly.
the fact that she really wanted to experience the suffering that Jesus went through on the cross, where he felt forsaken at some moment. And
Yeah.
so the only way you can experience that yourself is for you also to feel alone and forsaken at some period of time. And I always like to think as well, it's very simplistic to criticize the way that someone is experiencing their spiritual life or their religious life, and make it seem foolish, or make it seem childish. Like, for example, the people who may attempt to criticize Mother Teresa in this situation. But I like to think, if we zoomed out and we tried to look and see what type of universe would be most meaningful, it's almost like the atheists are arguing for some. They're arguing that it should be more simplistic and childish. They're saying, no, oh well, where was her feelings and experiences of God? But if they come so easily, like, how meaningful are those things? Whereas for her, she was really struggling and fighting and being really tested to the highest possible level. And for a story to be maximally interesting, it needs to have that tension. It needs to have the potential for failure and the potential um, for suffering and difficulties and loss. And if all the people who believed in the divine and followed the spiritual life, if they were judged on how easy their lives were, that would make for a very unconvincing type of spiritual or religious life, because no one would be ever being tested then. If everyone who claimed to believe in God, their life suddenly became painless and easy and lacking in any challenges, because God was taking all the challenges away for them, to me seems that we're taking away the agency of the individual, and the individual's ability to really have a profound and
But I mean,
difficult journey.
isn't it true that eventually our life does become lighter and brighter and happier when we live the spiritual life? I mean, I was always sold on that idea.
Yeah, but if it became too one-sided, if you just were like this Pollyanna character and you never had any troubles anymore and you never had to strive and battle and fight, then that to me is not something that seems to be worthy of striving for. Whereas the type of spiritual life that I see that is realistic and that people are actually living is the type of spiritual life where all of those things are available, but you also have to put the work in. You have to be willing to fight against ignorance and to try and transform your own limitations. And you have to be
And you have
willing
to
to,
pay the rent on earth. So Sri Ramakrishna's
yeah,
concerts, so Devi, she always said, when you live on earth, you have to pay the rent, and the rent is
yeah,
suffering. So there's
yeah.
nobody, not even spiritual masters, are exempt from suffering when they live on earth.
Yeah, so I think suffering and difficulties should be embraced as part of the experience,
But
and
for 49 years, though,
yeah,
that seems
it
long.
as well. It depends what caliber of soul you have, and then I think Mother Teresa really had the highest caliber of soul, and so she was someone who was willing to sacrifice every single selfish thought, desire, or action to do the work that needed to be done. And there's very few people on earth who are at that level that are really willing to sacrifice absolutely everything and like to go
Yeah,
down into the gutter. And so then she
okay.
is someone who was capable then of having the most challenging and difficult type of spiritual life. And we wouldn't wish that on everyone, but for her, I think it's a beautiful thing and a beautiful because what it does is it leaves a legacy that
That's what I was
is
saying. It's for
it's
other people. It's so inspiring to see that if she could do it, like, and I'm moaning about just having a few, dark days, and
yeah,
I'm not great meditations. Just think of Mother Teresa, 49 years.
yeah,
You're going to go through a dry period for a couple of months or a couple of years. No
yeah.
biggie.
Yeah, and I think her story is so human as well, where I think people can much more easily identify with a saint that struggled and suffered and felt
Yeah.
alone and felt separate and felt disconnected. That to them, that to most Christians or religious people or spiritual people, that feels much closer to their experience than some saint who was, like a Saint Francis of Assisi, who was seeing God everywhere and in nature and all around them. That's
I
not
mean, he
the
didn't have it easy either. I mean, he chose extreme poverty. He used to sleep in a barn without any blankets in the hay on cold nights in northern Italy.
what a
Yeah, he had it
life.
tough. He was living, walking barefoot for hundreds of miles, and you
Yeah.
know,
So, but yeah, so I think her story becomes much more interesting with the fact that we know her inner struggles rather
yes,
than because I think people imagined throughout her life that, oh, it comes so easily for her.
she's
She
seeing
never,
God all the time. She's seeing Jesus.
yeah.
She's experiencing this love, and yeah, true.
So it makes it more real and somewhat more profound.
Also, what I wanted to say about the dark night of the soul is that you never know when the dawn is breaking. The dawn can be very nearby. And so for me, I went through a dark night of the soul, I guess that lasted 8 months. So from the time that I consciously joined my spiritual community, the Sri Chinmoy Center, that was in February of 98. I guess that's kind of the start of it because I told this before in previous episode. I was at the acting school, in an environment that was, not very spiritual, you could say. There was a lot of desire life there. There was a lot of big egos, um, as in the acting world you could imagine. So it was a very difficult environment, not very welcoming environment to grow your wings and go through that period. And I struggled for many months. I felt isolated. I isolated myself. I had a very difficult couple of months there, and they actually made me do the first year over again because I wasn't connecting to my classmates. But then I did have a breakthrough, and then really I felt God was descending, and I had an unbelievable breakthrough in my meditation. One day I saw this little light, and I started concentrating on it, and then my depression faded. I was kind of suffering from kind of a depression that we talked about. Depression faded in a couple of days. I felt happy. I felt cheerful. I started to connect again. and I made it through the other side. It was really an unbelievable transformation. So I really feel for people who are going through that dark night, but I want to say, just keep on going, hang on, be determined, because you never know, the dawn may just be very, very close. And my teacher, Sri Chinmoy, also talked about that. There was another aphorism that I came across that I wanted to share. He wrote, "When you feel that you are farther than the farthest from your Lord, beloved supreme, who knows? Perhaps that is the time when he is nearer than the nearest." So it's very often those
Beautiful.
moments when the night seems darkest, that's when the day is actually very close by.
Yeah, and I was just thinking when you were talking just then, it was reminding me that actually in our spiritual tradition that we're part of, we actually have a way of attempting to cultivate these types of experiences and to allow people to actually face up to this type of experience in a controlled and in supportive environment. And most people wouldn't commonly think of this type of experience being possible to invoke. But I think one of the great ways to do that is by doing something physically very, very demanding over like a prolonged period of time. So whether it's an ultra marathon, or in our community, Sri Chinmoy was the one who really inspired us, our community, to put on multi-day running events. So we put on 6-day races, 10-day races, all the way up to the 52-day, 3,100-mile race. And I think inside these races, every single runner has the experience of facing up to the dark night of the soul, because when you day after day put yourself in a situation where there's this tremendous load and there's this tremendous responsibility, or this tremendous weight on your shoulders that you just feel like it's crushing you. And I think the reason that people make so much progress from these types of events is that it pushes you into this type of experience where, as the days go on, you get tighter and tighter. Even though you're moving closer to the finish line, it seems as though the finish line is getting further and further away. It's, like in a 6-day race, it's like we would think, looking from the outside, oh, day 3 or 4, that's great. You've only got 5 or 6 days to go. No, I tell you, like day 3 or 4, that is the worst possible time, because you've already come so far, but you still feel as though, like at that point, 5 days or 6 days to go, this is like an incomprehensible number. And so I think when people find themselves in these situations, it really strips you down to your most bare essentials and shows you that if you just simply keep turning up and keep moving forward, at some point you will be in this incredible dark night. And then at some point where it's never clear exactly when it's going to happen, but at some point you will come out from that and you'll come through the other side. And you often see that in the runners, and especially in the very long one, the 3,100, that in those first few weeks people are really finding it so incredibly challenging. And then at some point, some part of you stops resisting, some part of you stops fighting against the experience, and it's almost like the ego gives up and surrenders. And then everything starts to flow. Then you see people really start to come alive again, and you see their speed pick up, or even if it's not their speed, even just the ease with which they're doing the activity again starts to return, and there becomes the sense of flow. And so I think that's really interesting, because as well, the fact that people are so interested in these types of events now, whether it's ultra marathons or Ironmans or any type of event where it really pushes you to your right to your breaking point, to the deepest and darkest part of your being. And then you're asked, like, how long can you withstand it? How long can you be in that space? And the only way that you really break in that situation is if you give up. Whereas if you just keep moving forward and just keep turning up and just keep giving yourself to the experience, at some point, again, the dawn comes and the sun returns, and you feel that inspiration, and you feel that there is a deeper meaning to what you're doing.
That's why the term night is so well chosen, because it is really going
Yeah.
through a night. You're going through darkness, getting darker and darker and darker, and then suddenly the dawn breaks. I had an experience like that when I did an ultra marathon in August. We did a 47-mile race in New York, the home of our spiritual community, during our annual retreat. And it's exactly like that. Like the first couple of hours, it's okay. The first 2 hours, then 3 hours, it starts becoming really hard. But then the last 2 hours, like especially not the last hour, but the hour just before last, that
Mm,
seems like so eternal, so long. It seems like to never end. And you're suffering, and I was just slogging along. I wasn't getting any speed. And it's just like, okay, another lap. Okay, another lap. And everything in you just wants to stop. But exactly like you say, you just have to keep going. You just have to keep going. So that's a beautiful analogy for going through a spiritual dark night of the soul. Just feel like you're in an ultra marathon. You don't know when the finish is coming. That's the only difference. You don't know when the light is breaking, but just keep pushing, putting one foot after the other. Be very patient, and also don't worry, don't lose faith just because you're not seeing any signs. There can be no signs. There can be a complete absence of God in your feeling. And then all of a sudden, boom, it can be your next meditation, your next prayer, your next chanting, your next breath work, where it all comes together and it all aligns. So one counsel is definitely be patient and be determined, right? Persevere.
yeah, it reminds me of the marathon monks in outside of Kyoto in Mount Hiei, and they have this tradition where you build up over many, many years until you're doing a pilgrimage route every night, and it's
These are
about
Buddhist monks, right? They're
yeah,
Japanese
yeah,
Buddhist monks.
there's
Yeah.
Japanese Zen Buddhists, and they get to the point where they're doing basically a double marathon every night. So it's like 84 kilometers. And because they're walking and wearing very traditional clothing, it takes them a very long time. So when you're doing the final rounds, you're basically finishing, and then you have a very short period of time to prepare again, and then you're starting. But what I was thinking about with them is that they have to carry a rope and a knife, and that if they ever feel as though that they're not going to make it through, they're expected to either disembowel themselves or hang themselves. And I think that's just such a great symbolic, let's say, a symbolic way of saying, hey, never give up. Like,
Yeah,
just
I
do
think I
not,
think no
whatever.
few monks actually done that in the past couple of hundreds of years. There's
Yeah,
a story, an apocryphal story, that some monk has done it, a
yeah.
couple of centuries ago. But yeah, they don't do that. But yeah, like you say, it's a great symbol, and a great kind of method to keep going.
Because in some ways, those things act as a reminder that if you give up, you will die. Because some part of you, like the good part of you, the part of you that you're trying to feed and develop, if you allow yourself to give up when you know that you shouldn't, that you know the goal is still in front of you, and you want to keep moving towards it, but some part of you, the lower part of you, pulls you back and causes you to give up on yourself, there is a death there. There is a death of what you could have become. It's like the death of who you could have grown into. And that is a great tragedy. And it's always good to remind yourself that the physical death of your body is not the only type of death. And it's probably not, it's by far not the worst type of death, because there's many other deaths that you can face in life, and that you can live out, that are actually much worse than the death of your physical body. Because if you allow the good in you to die, if you allow the vision of a higher reality in you to die, if you allow your love and your generosity and kindness, if you allow those to die, to me, those are all much greater tragedies than the physical body ceasing to exist, because the physical body comes and the physical body goes. But when you give up on yourself and your own divinity, and you choose to turn back towards the night rather than moving towards the day, that is a tragedy that you'll pay for over a much greater period of time than you would when you lose your physical body. The physical body, when it goes, it's gone, and it's time to move on to the next phase in your life. But yeah, when you've done something which goes really against those higher visions, the vision of divinity, the division of light and transcendence, that is something that you have to carry with you, and that will be something that you'll pay the price for a far longer period of time. So perhaps we should all have a dagger and a rope to remind us that
Yeah,
do
it can
not
be a
give up.
plastic, it can be a plastic dagger. It doesn't have to be real steel. Just to remind
Yeah,
yourself.
just a wee
Also,
reminder.
exactly. One thing I wanted to touch upon as well is the importance of a community, and
Mm,
also the importance of a spiritual master or spiritual teacher, because a community really keeps you grounded. I was so lucky when I was going through my dark night. I had my spiritual community. I had this Richard Center. I was going there twice a week for group meditations, and it always centered me. Even when I felt lonely and isolated, there in the center, I felt I felt some relief from that staleness and emptiness. So it's great to have spiritual friends or spiritual family, a community that keeps you grounded. These people probably have gone through these experiences themselves, and you don't even have to talk about it, but just being with them is already healing. But then the other thing is also a spiritual teacher, a guru or a master or somebody who's really lived through the experience and can help you, because there's this narrative nowadays that, we don't need teachers anymore. We live in an age where we go beyond the teacher. We can just figure it out ourselves. But I feel we're really throwing away something very precious if we throw away teachers, because teachers represent millennia of knowledge, of wisdom. And we're not going to use that in our growth. Like somebody who has actually gone the way before us and has, can also impart that through us. It's such an amazing gift if you have a real teacher. And in any field of life, whether it's learning an instrument to play or learning a new skill, but especially in spirituality, meditation, and spiritual practice, if you have somebody who can guide you and can correct you if you're making mistakes. I mean, we all make mistakes. And especially going through the dark night, we feel so isolated and alone. It's so helpful to have somebody to bring wisdom to us and to encourage us and to help us through, to kind of take us by the hand, as it were, and guide us through this difficult period.
Yeah, and especially when we're dealing with that esoteric world, when it's the world beyond just the physical reality, having someone who has actually walked that path, because that path to us at the moment is invisible. It's not like the path from Kathmandu to Mount Everest, where you can find signs along the way, and there's something physically in the world that you can
Which we
actually
have to
see
talk about later, because you
and
just
follow.
did the path.
Yeah, but
Spoiler first.
when the teacher is explaining the path to realization, he's talking about invisible guideposts or invisible markings along the way that you are actually not qualified to see at the moment. So even if you can get information or you can read the stories of other great spiritual figures and think, oh, well, I'll obviously be able to figure it out. I mean, I don't think there has been an infinite number of people who've figured it out. So to think that you will be one of the chosen few that will figure it out all by yourself is perhaps a slight sign of hubris. So having the humility to say, okay, there's a whole bunch of things that I don't know, and being aware of my own limitations, and thinking that the teacher is someone who is not really asking for anything in return for his teachings. He's
Yeah,
asking for your
say
aspirations.
exactly. A genuine teacher will not
Yeah.
ask for money or for any other compensation, but your aspiration, your inner cry
So
is the thing.
that seems a very fair price to pay, to even to be given some guidance that is going to help you get started, or to be aware of some of the pitfalls or dangers along the way, is so invaluable that I think it's definitely foolishness to not recognize and not respect those teachings that
Yeah,
have
and
been
I
offered.
use it. So I have a story from my own dark night of the soul. I remember at one point in this 8-month experience, I was going on a joy day, which is a weekend where we meet with our spiritual community in Europe. We get together, we meditate, we have program, and we're going in the car, and I was just feeling this kind of emptiness and confusion and loneliness, but I also felt this inspiration to go there. And then we played a tape of Sri Chinmoy reciting his own poetry in the car of our guru Sri Chinmoy. And then this one poem came by, and it just struck me like a bolt of lightning, and it was so amazing. I felt, when I heard that poem, I felt that my teacher truly understood me so deeply. And not only that, I felt an actual interaction in the inner world. I felt he came and put something inside me and changed something inside me. There was an inner communication going on. And I just wanted to read out the poem because I think it can help others who are going through this dark night of the soul, because it is just such a beautiful, poetic description of that experience. And this poem he wrote actually was his third poem in the English language, I think somewhere in the 40s or 50s, when he was studying at the Sri Aurobindo ashram. He was a young man studying his spiritual life there. And this poem is called The Golden Flute. A sea of peace and joy and light beyond my reach, I know. In me, the storm-tossed, weeping night finds room to rage and flow. I cry aloud, but all in vain. I helpless, the earth unkind. What soul of might can share my pain? Death dart alone I find. A raft am I on the sea of time. My oars are washed away. How can I hope to reach the clime of God's eternal day? But hark! I hear thy golden flute. Its notes bring the summit down. Now safe am I, O Absolute. Gone death, gone night's stark frown. Isn't that a beautiful poem?
Beautiful. We just need some haunting flute music in the background, and
Yeah,
we'll record it, put that out. That's going to solve a lot of people's problems.
yeah. That poem there was also so much hope. First it described
Yeah,
the suffering, and it just felt, wow, my master truly understands that suffering. Like he so deeply understands it. But then at the last stanza, there's the golden flute, and I just felt in my heart, okay, this is still coming. The golden flute
yeah.
will dawn, and the night will end. And actually, it did. A couple of months later, it did end. So
Beautiful. That really is one of the great poems, that one.
So you yourself went on a bit of a hike. I just wanted to share with our listeners. We didn't see you for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. You went on this beautiful run through the Himalayas. You're now back in Kathmandu, Nepal, having gone
Yes.
all the way to Everest Base Camp running. Your
Yeah.
own dark night of the spirit, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And you've had some amazing experience there.
Yeah, I did. And what it reminds me of is that when you set out on any great journey, you have no idea what's really going to happen. You have some sort of way markers and you think, okay, I'm going to go to this place and I'll do this and I'll be there. But you have no real understanding of what that journey is going to entail and the experiences that you'll have and or the infinite number of moments that you'll experience. And so my plan was to follow the old expedition route to Everest Base Camp. And so this is the route that Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay, the two first people to climb Mount Everest, back in the 1950s.
Right? He was in New
Yes.
Zealand.
Yep.
Okay.
And so back in
As
the
are you.
1950s, they would start much, much further away from Mount Everest. You would start closer to Kathmandu. Now, with the airport being built up high in Lukla, you can fly in and you can be up in the Everest region very, very quickly. But we decided, no, we're going to start like a long way away. So it was almost 160 kilometers from where we started to getting to Everest Base Camp. And then we went over a series of high passes known as the three passes loop as well. So we combined a lot of different sections, but it was a very long trip. It was 18 days. And
You went with a friend of yours, right?
yes, I went with one of my athletes that I coach. And so we had an amazing series of experiences, but you don't know what is going to be the most meaningful moments, and the trip itself is very hard because you end up going from the lowlands where it's really hot and you're climbing over one valley and down to the bottom of the next valley and then climbing over another valley. So it's incredibly mountainous because you're heading in an easterly direction. So you're cutting across all of the big valleys that drain the Himalayas until you finally start to get close to Everest, and then you head north and you start heading up into the big mountains. And when you head up there, you go from the lowlands where it's 30 degrees and it's green and lush and there's beautiful rhododendrons flowering, and you start getting above the tree line and it starts to become very harsh and very cold, and there's very few plants, there's a lot of snow and ice, and it's very powerful, brooding, intimidating environment. And on a beautiful day, it's amazing. Like, you're seeing all these amazing mountains, but then when the weather closes in, it becomes very foreboding and very intimidating. You're going through these mountains and you're seeing all this misty fog, and then lurking behind this fog is these huge rock faces and these huge ice falls. And so it's a very powerful environment, and it really shows you and makes you feel that you feel very small. You feel very, it gives you a sense of perspective. that the universe is very big and very powerful, and this world is very big and very powerful, and that we don't have, all of the answers and all of the power to fight against these forces. These forces at work here, that are much more ancient and much more powerful than we are. So it's a very humbling experience. And so, as well, when you get to the very high altitude, there's very little oxygen. So it becomes really hard to do everything. So going over a small climb becomes very hard. Climbing up to, any pass becomes very, very difficult. And so it's a sort of thing where I could run or hike really hard for, 2 or 3 minutes, and then you have to stop and then you have to catch your breath for 30 seconds and then you can push again. So you're
What
really,
altitude are you talking about here?
so we've spent a long time around 5,000 meters high. So
Wow.
5,000 meters is far taller than the top of Mont Blanc. It's taller than all of the 14ers in Colorado. So it's very high, and you're always everything's cold and damp, and so like life becomes very harsh and difficult up there. And yeah, you feel these forces, these ancient, incredibly powerful forces of the glaciers and the mountains, the coming together of the two great plates that are causing the up thrust of the Himalayas. And so in this type of environment, as well, it's very dangerous. Like, people die up there every year, through either altitude sickness or falls or all types of different experiences. And when I was just arriving, heading from the last settlement to the Everest Base Camp, which is the highest point that you can climb up to, at that point, it turns into serious mountaineering. Um, I had an experience where I was one of the first people on the trail, and I came around a corner and I found several hikers and some Nepalese guides all standing, looking over the edge of the track. And there was actually, you could see off the edge of the track, there was a body. And so I immediately felt that I had a responsibility to act and to do something in the situation. I could see the man's legs in the air, and I could see his head was down amongst the rocks. And so I asked the guides, I said, has anyone checked? Is this man alive? Is he dead? And they said, one of us climbed down there, but there was no response. And so I was very,
Was he far away from where you were? How far down was he?
maybe 6 meters, 7 meters off the side of the track. And so I was really aware that this person could very much still be alive. Like, he could have fallen and injured himself or been knocked unconscious, but he had also his heavy hiking pack on as well. And all of that force was pushing him down. And so I knew that if we wanted to do something, it was like time was of the essence. So I immediately threw down all my gear, climbed down, and started checking on him, talking to him, seeing if I could get any response. And there was no response. So he was upside down in his pack. He had a very large trekking pack. So I knew I needed to get that off. And when someone's upside down in the rocks, it's really hard to move them around and to get the pack off them. So I had to unclip his chest strap and his waist strap, and then I had to loosen the arm straps. And so after some complicated movements trying to get his pack off, I managed to finally get that off. And one of my
Was he a
positions.
Western? Was he a Westerner or a local?
No, he was a Sherpa. So he was a Sherpa, what's called a climbing guide. So he was someone who was going up to do guiding on Everest itself. And I always feel that all life is incredibly sacred, but especially human life. So a human life is the most sacred form of life. And in the last moments of your life, you want to die, I think, with some dignity. Like, no one wants to die upside down, with all of these people walking past without their dignity. So I felt that the most important thing I could do was to either, first of all, see if he was still alive and help him. And if that was impossible, at least to put him in a dignified position. So his last moments were not colored by that experience. And so once I'd taken his pack off, I called down to a couple of the Nepalese guides, and they came down and they helped me roll him over, and we sat him up. And so now he was sitting upright, and I could tend to him and see what was going on. And so they immediately climbed back up, and I could see there was a lot of blood amongst the rocks. So there was obviously a serious head injury. And so at that point, like, I could do what I could do. So I could check his pulse at his neck. I could check whether he was still breathing. I could check whether his pupils were moving. And so once I checked all of those things off and saw that there was no response on any of those, I knew that he'd passed away. And at that moment, when you realize that you have a body that was embodied by a soul until just a few moments ago, and then now you realize that that body is no longer holding that soul, and that the soul is free. It's an incredibly powerful and sacred moment. And so, what I did was I closed his eyes. I said a few prayers. I invoked the Buddha. He would have come from a Buddhist family, and I just really took that moment to really offer my goodwill and my love and appreciation to his soul, and to let him know that his time here is done, and that his journey in this form is over. And there's something so magical and beautiful about that moment, where it was like two souls, my soul, his soul, were there. And
Could you feel his soul? Could you feel the response?
yeah, I could really feel his soul so powerfully. And there was not, for me, there was not a sadness. It was like I did exactly the best I could in that moment. Like I did everything in my capacities to help that man, in whatever way I could. And then seeing that he was, his body was comfortable, but his soul was no longer trapped, it was no longer there in the body. It was like, okay, my job here is done. And it's a profoundly affecting experience, because it makes it real, the concept that you and I and everyone we know will one day, our soul will also leave our body. Because he was a man who was a strong, fit guy. I think he was in his early 50s. He was heading up to Everest Base Camp to guide climbers and to work for the season. And he had no idea his death was around the corner. He was thinking, I'm sure he was thinking about all his responsibilities. He had family, he had, business, he had his work that he was heading up to do. And he had no idea that this was going to be the last morning of his life.
What do you
And
think might have happened? He slipped, or it was a gust of
yeah,
wind, or
yeah, I mean, the thing is, at that altitude, it's very easy when you're not fully acclimatized to feel a little bit lightheaded. So, like, he easily could have just stumbled or fallen or just tripped on a rock. Like, at any moment in that environment, yeah, like, it really made me aware of how at any moment, if you got something wrong, you also could fall and die. It's a very uncompromising and unforgiving environment.
makes you very
And
focused, I can imagine. Yeah.
yeah, but it was what really struck me was that so often we spend our time thinking about things which will have zero meaning in the long term. We're thinking about paying a bill, or we're thinking about, whether we remembered to do some important housekeeping, or some important piece of um,
Or putting up an Instagram story.
yeah, all of these things that we spend all of our time caught up with. And then he was a man who suddenly life was taken away from him. And it was so fleeting and so real and so quick. And it because we always think our death is somewhere far away from where we are. We don't think it's just around the corner. We don't think, oh, maybe when I walk outside today, I'm going to get hit by a bus, and the whole thing is going to come to an end. We have
Yeah.
this amazing ability to convince ourselves that death is somewhere far, far away, and we're not going to see it.
Well,
Excuse me, for a very
Sri
long
Chinmoy,
time.
yeah, Sri Chinmoy often reminded us that it can happen any moment. He said, "Whatever you have to do, whatever good things, do them today, because you never know. Death can be around
Yeah,
the corner,
and
and that'd
so
be
that was
such a shame if you find out you haven't done what you were supposed to do."
And so that was really my feeling coming away from the situation. I felt like a deep sense of, there was a sense of emotion. I felt like emotionally affected from the experience,
Mm,
but I also felt in some way just the absolute importance of living your life as fully as you can on a day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute basis, because
yeah.
you will never regret that. You will never regret living your life as fully and as consciously as possible on an hour by hour basis. You'll never
Yeah.
think, you'll never find that suddenly you died and you think, oh God, I wish I hadn't spent so much time trying to be
Maybe a
as
bit
present.
challenging. In the moment, it may be a bit more challenging. Like,
Yeah.
it's not this life where you're constantly doing things every second, right? It's being present.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's like
You want it-
learning to live being where you are and doing the things that you're doing, because that's
Yeah.
when you're most powerful and that's when things are most real. When I'm in a place but my consciousness is 10 years or 10,000 miles away, when I'm thinking about what's happening back home in New Zealand or what my responsibilities are, next summer when I get back home, if I'm doing that, I'm not fully present experiencing reality as it is around me. And the deepest meaning is to be found where you are. The deepest meaning that you're looking for is never somewhere else. It's always to be found in the here and now. And so I'm so grateful to that soul and that man, for offering me that lesson. And I was really felt blessed to be there for him in those last moments. And it was really
Wow.
nice because once I climbed back on the trail and I pronounced that the man had passed away, the locals were very grateful that someone who knew what they were doing or knew something more than they did had helped the man, and they were very grateful that that he had some dignity and he was in a position. So then they covered him with a sleeping mat, so he had some privacy there.
Well, why do
Um,
you think they didn't go down to him?
well, I mean, the thing is, I don't think people know how they're going to respond in those situations until they find themselves in this situation. Because you could think, oh, okay, if I came across someone who'd had a serious accident, I should get in there and help. But nearly everyone froze. So when I got to the point, there was like 6 or 7 people just looking at the body. And
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, people, what's going on here? Like, what's happened? And they're like,
Yeah.
we don't know. We don't know what's happened. But I think it's one of those things where some of us have innate and natural calling to be involved in those situations. And I've felt myself in those situations before, where when there is a crisis or a life or death situation, like I will always respond. Like there was no thought, there was no apprehension, there was no worry. It was like immediately, as soon as I saw there was like a soul in need, I was completely committed to being involved and to doing everything I could to be of service, because
Yeah.
like that's the greatest calling that you can have, to be of service to another soul when they're at their most vulnerable. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I
What
was
an
down
amazing
I was down
experience.
there in a flash and doing everything I could.
Yeah.
So if you're deciding whether who to die around in any time in the future,
Yeah.
I will always be available to help out.
Great.
So just
Well,
remember that.
exactly. Well, if you go running through the Himalayas, you may actually find yourself in a life and death situation. So anyway,
Yeah.
it's good to have you around there. So that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for sharing that. It's a beautiful story and that wonderful, yeah, really, life and death experience. And tying back to the theme of today, the dark night of the soul, I hope we offered some insights and some personal stories, and we shared some of our own wisdoms around the dark night of the soul and some of our teachers' insights. So if you're going through, just remember, keep going. Never give up. That's a very important one. Never give up. Be patient, and your next meditation, your next prayer may open the door and may usher in the dawn. So that brings us to the end. Thank you for listening. And oh yeah, if you like our content, it really helps us if you can help us with the algorithm. So on YouTube, can you follow us? Can you leave a comment on the podcast listening apps? If you can rate our show or leave a review or also leave a comment, that really helps us. We really appreciate that. And we'll see you again next week with a new episode.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.